I like this argument here. He says, no, he could have chosen not to plant the tree in the beginning. That's like saying, because it's basically us abusing God's creation, right? Like it's sinful to have relations with a dog. God should have just not created the dog.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a friend who struggles with impeccability. How would you help someone understand that Christ couldn't have sinned? He thinks it reduces Christ's humanity.
Well, I mean, are they somebody who believes in the Bible? Because the Bible literally says that's not possible. I mean, it literally says in he there was no sin. So how is like that? They're just verbatimly going against the Bible. If they reject the Bible and they just believe in Jesus, then you can simply just ask them the epistemic question of basically like, how do you know anything about Jesus at all? You have to know it from the scriptures. But if you think that the scriptures are like corrupted or not actually true or anything like that, then again, you're just making up your own Jesus in your head. So like if they do believe in the Bible though, and they somehow think that the scriptures like support them, that's ridiculous, because the Bible verbatimly condemns that like multiple times, especially with St. Paul, unless they're one of those weirdos that thinks that Paul is not true or something like that. Like I debated somebody one time that they have this weird textual criticism view where they think that Paul was invented by Marcion.
Huh.
And then like the Q source theory, you know about Q source?
No, I've heard the Paul was an invention thing before though. It's usually like schizophrenic though.
Yeah, Q source was this thing that was during like it was kind of like during like the Reformation period, where a lot of people started to think like, oh, well, it seems that maybe there was some kind of Q gospel or like a gospel that they all got together and made. And then basically they all formed their gospels off of this document. A lot of these people that think that Paul is an invention by Marcion also affirm that Marcion's work called the Evangelion, which is a book that's really similar to the book of Luke. They'll say that Luke actually took from Marcion's Evangelion, and he didn't even write his work for himself. He wrote it from the perspective of the Evangelion and then changed it to be like church-based or something like that. And then they actually use arguments for basically people like second and third century church fathers, where they're talking about or they don't like talk about Luke as much as they talk about the other gospels. And then they try to like make up some story about how like, see, this is why. Because do you see how the fathers don't talk about Luke a lot? It's because they knew that Luke was corrupted by Marcion. Like they do things like that. It's crazy. Some people have weird perspectives about history.
This is an atheist lady. Evangelion is a great anime. Great. So become Orthodox immediately. All right, let's see. Yeah, no such thing as a great anime. That's right. Thanks for becoming a member, Alan. God bless. I appreciate it. I will definitely be recording some kind of members video tomorrow because I haven't done it yet this week. I'm slacking. I'm sorry. I need to do it. So I will make a members video this week. All right, let's see. Here's a question. Why is the Trinity necessary compared to a Unitarian God?
And there's a couple arguments for that. There's a historical argument for that. Where if you want to basically bite the bullet and take a basically take a great apostasy theory, you're free to do that, but that's really easily refutable because a lot of people will try to basically make the argument that the church kind of just like basically the Unitarian position like disappeared or something like that, like after Constantine. Even though that the main argument that I usually use against people like Unitarians, right, is I refer to the Council of Antioch that were in the 260s, where they condemned Paul of Samosata. Paul of Samosata, verbatimly, if you look at what he believed, identical to the Unitarian position. It's that they're because in case you guys didn't know this, Unitarianism is not Arianism. Arius is somehow better than these people. Like Arius at least believed in some way, shape, or form that there was a pre-existence of Christ to a degree. And he also believed that the word was Jesus, right? The Unitarians don't even believe that. The Unitarians believe that Jesus basically possessed this power called Logos, which is Philo of Alexandria's view prior to, or in the first century, where he was a Hellenic Jew. And the Unitarians basically believe Philo's view on the Logos, where it's like a power of God that was given to Jesus when he was created, which is Paul of Samosata's view as well. Arius believed that basically the Holy Spirit was a created being, but the Unitarians believe that the Holy Spirit is an impersonal force. It's just another power that's basically passed through by Jesus, who was given the power of the Logos. And so, like, that view was condemned in the 260s. In like the Universal Church, like denied Paul of Samosata and exiled and excommunicated him. So historically speaking, you could just point to something like that and you could say, is this when the church fell away in Antioch? And then if they say yes, you just be like, okay, so Constantine didn't invent the Trinity then? Very simple, right? It's just like you read like the history of how heresies were condemned over time. Modalism was already condemned like by Saint Hippolytus, which was like the 200s, I think. He condemned modalism because he was condemning a man named Noetus, who was a modalist. He also believed in patripassianism, where the Father died on the cross. So, I mean, like they're like, and then so modalism was condemned, Unitarianism was condemned, Arianism was condemned, right? Like after you can see the Trinity just form off of the heresies that existed. Like you can literally just see it that way. Because you see all the heresies that were condemned by the time that Nicaea was here, the Trinity was the only other possible view, literally. So even so, then obviously we would affirm that the ones who stayed Orthodox affirm the Trinity in that case, because that would just be kind of like a deduction from that. But I mean, theologically speaking, if you want like a funny argument for why Unitarianism is not necessarily possible, a lot of Unitarians are classical theists, where they think that basically God does not change, right? God's not composite, all these types of things. But when you look at the property of love, love is a relational property. It's basically when you denote love, it's going from a lover to a beloved. And in a Unitarian view, prior to creation, God was loving nobody. So then in that case, basically, he went from potency to act. When he created the world, he changed, literally. He had to not love and then started loving. So then in that case, they would have to just basically concede that God changes. In the Trinity, that's not a problem because we say that the Father loves the Son eternally, manifest as the Holy Spirit. So then therefore, God was always actualizing love even prior to creation. So then God never changed.
So we got a lot of like atheists that joined that are spamming in the comments. I think it's kind of funny. I've been reading their comments. I like this argument here. He says, no, he could have chosen not to plant the tree in the beginning. That's like saying, because it's basically us abusing God's creation, right? Like it's sinful to have relations with a dog. God should have just not created the dog.
Yeah, exactly. It's
like,
it's funny too because
dumbest argument I've heard.
A lot of people also don't like it because when you think about it from like the Orthodox lens, right? The tree was placed there because eventually, after Adam and Eve were enough in their process of theosis, of being with God, they would have eventually been told to take from the tree, but they weren't ready. So they took from it before they were actually supposed to do it. So he put the tree there with the implication that eventually it would be given to Adam and Eve, but they took from it without being able to do it. That's why he said, you will die if you take from this, because they were spiritually babies. They didn't know anything about theosis. They didn't know anything at that time about truly understanding good and evil from the perspective of being with God and understanding these things prior to taking from the tree. And so they took from the tree and tried to do their own thing, which is the first sin, basically going against God, saying, I can do this by myself, which is what literally every single person that goes against God does. And they simply just went against God's orders by taking from the tree prior to being allowed to take from the tree. The tree was placed there because they were eventually going to be given access to the tree after they were enlightened enough.
Yeah. So for the atheists that are in the comments, I mean, y'all are just spamming like nonsensically. If you want to ask a question, put a Q in the chat or send in a super chat and I'll get to your question first. But if you just keep spamming like schizophrenics, I'm just going to ban you from the chat. So ask a question or be gone. Let's see. What is the difference between begottenness and spiration?
The classic Orthodox dilemma that people think that we have. This is a question that I get all the time because this is basically a Roman Catholic question to try to trick Orthodox into saying, I don't know. because the argument for the Filioque that Aquinas uses is saying that there must be some form of relative opposition between the Son and the Spirit. And so then therefore the Son must spirate the Spirit, right? That's it. That's one of the main arguments. And that would be considered their difference, is in the fact that the Son also spirates the Spirit. That's how we know the Son's not the Spirit. We don't have that problem. A lot of people think we have that problem, but we believe in a doctrine called eternal manifestation, which is basically where the Son is given to the Spirit after he is caused, which is in St. John of Damascus in the exposition of the Orthodox faith, which is the main person that was used for the argument at the Council of Blackernay in 1285. And this basically is the manifester and the manifested. The Son is the manifester of the Holy Spirit, meaning that he makes the Spirit known, but that is an eternal relational aspect of the Son and the Spirit. It doesn't mean that there has to be some kind of relative opposition. Or if you want to take it from the route, it's actually funny too, because not even all the Roman Catholics agree that this is a good argument for the Filioque, because John Duns Scotus himself actually said that this wasn't the case. People like Claude Frassin from the 1700s, he was a famous Scotist that basically refuted this problem. He actually posited the question of, would the Son be distinct from the Spirit, even if the Son did not, or even if the Spirit did not proceed from the Son? And he said yes, because of these things called formal constituents. It's called a disparate relation, where the Son possesses this thing called a formal constituent, which is called sonship, which denotes that he comes from the Father in that manner. And then because of the fact that the Son possesses sonship, he's therefore not the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit does not possess sonship, right? It's actually a lot more simple than you think. And that's actually an argument that the Eastern Fathers use as well. We just call it the relation of origin, where we say that that spirating the Spirit or procession and begetting are not semantically equivalent to each other. They are denoting a proper mode of existence. People like Aquinas denies that the mode of existence is how you determine the person. So like, that's why they think that it's necessary to ask a question like that. I'm not saying that the guy asking the question is positing that, but we have multiple answers against that Filioque, because that's a Filioque argument. I already can tell from a mile away.
This one here. Question: how do I rebuke Filioque in 30 seconds? Done already.
Yeah.
Rewind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, like the best thing that I like to use for that is one of the main per se axioms that Aristotle had, and it's something that was used by the fathers as well, is this thing called simple act, simple agent, where if an act that is done is simple, then the agent that caused it is then therefore simple. And the if there is basically an act that is from two agents, it's then therefore a composite act from a composite agent or two agents, which then means that the effect is then therefore composite. So I like to make the argument that the Holy Spirit is composite in their view.